I thought the wind and the harsh storm that night was what rattled my window so violently. Instead, it was something way more harsh and sinister, more ugly and horrid. Because of that night, I couldn't look out the windows in my own home. I keep a curtain sewn shut against each one just so I wouldn't risk seeing it ever again. It began as a fairly calm night. It was filled with joyous laughter and stupid jokes as me and a couple of friends watched some movies late into the night. One movie in particular had me slightly on edge, as it involved real people rather than ghosts or monsters. So, as soon as a loud knocking sounded at the door, as we neared the end of the movie, it caused me to have my own self-inflicted jump scare from the sudden noise. The person on the other side of the door was one of my friend's boyfriends, ready to pick her up for the night. It was already 10 at night, and she worked early in the morning, so we can understand and didn't mind at all. Not even 5 minutes after she left, the storm softly started. It was almost as calm as our girls' night at first. Light droplets of the rain sparsely flew across the night sky and littered across the ground beneath. Once the clock hit 11 of the night, the storm had taken a darker turn, thunder bellowing throughout the air as the rain grew heavier and assaulted the ground with loud thuds. The wind was especially powerful at this point, causing trees to bend so much it wouldn't have been surprising if they had not snapped. Right in the middle of our more upbeat movie was when the power had gone out. I had always been afraid of the dark, just as most people probably are. So the idea of my friends having to go home at some point and leave me alone in the darkness made me feel almost nauseous. But no matter how much I begged her to just sleep over, she told me she couldn't and that I was going to be fine. Her sister eventually picked her up from my house, and I instantly went from being calm to overly anxious and utterly afraid as the darkness consumed me from every corner within the house. At some point, I somehow mustered enough courage to find my way upstairs with the light of my dying phone. Once I finally got into bed, the howling wind created an almost ominous aura as I laid under my covers. I just stayed there staring at the ceiling for God knows how long. It was at least 12 when I was left alone, and I had to sleep in order to not disturb my eternal clock too much. The only light that filled my room was a single, half-dead tea light in my dresser I had found in a junk drawer. In the dim moonlight from my window. Within minutes, the wind had grown stronger than ever before, and the storm outside seemed to only become more enraged. That was when I first heard it. It sounded like my window was ready to shatter at any moment, from how hard it was rattling from the strong winds. It was a reminiscence of someone shaking an aluminium tray vigorously. I hardly took an even single glance towards the noise, as there was so much happening at once. Random bellows of thunder outside, along with the heavy rain that was forcefully enough to sound like gunfire. Besides, I had finally begun to feel myself drifting off, even with the sound of my window rattling ever so often in the wind. What really got me to look towards my window was the loud bang that hammered against it, abruptly waking me from my sleep. I don't know how long I had slept for, and I don't really care. I just know that it had been there the whole time, and I hadn't even noticed. I wished it hadn't begged me for my attention that way it did, because it was something that would be stuck in my nightmares forever. As if my nightmares weren't horrifying enough as it is. It just stood there, slightly leaning to the side in order to fully get its face into my windows, its pure white eyes boring into my own. The moment it knew it had my attention, it placed both of its hands upon my windows. Its skin was almost slimy, as it left a mercury radius against the wet glass. Something even more unsettling about whatever was standing outside my window was how the rain seemed to avoid it. Not a single drop tries to touch it. Then it smiled widely to reveal just gums, not the teeth to be seen. That is, until a bountiful amount of razor-sharp teeth shoot out from within its gums. It didn't waste time before it began pushing against my window vigorously. The sound of my rattling window filled my room, the startling sound I had been so sure was just the wind not so long ago. I pressed myself against the wall behind my bed as hard as I could in an attempt to get as far from my window as possible. I was utterly terrified that if I moved or tried to run, it would even be more motivated to break in or go from another window. The moment I heard a soft crack come from the window, I began to feel the tears that welled within my eyes threatening to fall. I thought I was going to die. It was going to get inside. It was going to break through the window and sink its teeth into my skin. And no matter how loudly I screamed, nobody would be able to hear me, especially not over the sound of the storm. That thing outside my window seemed to get a little less patient as it started banging against my seemingly strong glass window, rather than shaking it viciously. In complete fear, I held my head in both hands, placing my face tightly against my legs as I began to shake. As soon as the sound of shattering glass filled my ears, I knew it was over. I felt the cold breeze against my skin as the scent of fresh rain filled my nose, but nothing happened. I sat there with my eyes closed for probably 30 minutes in fear that if I opened them, it would be standing there, waiting for me to give it attention once more before it killed me. One thing I noticed was how the storm had stopped almost seconds after the glass had broken. The only thing that filled my ears was the sound of my racing heart, and the whistling breeze, and the now far-off thunder. To my relief, once I opened my eyes, it wasn't there. Instead, there was simply just a hole where my window used to be. Glass shattered across my floor, along with a single mercury handprint placed against the wall beside my window. To this day, I have no idea what the hell that thing was, and I don't want to know. All I know is it disappeared with the storm, just as it had appeared with it. Sometimes when the storms pass by, I can still hear the rattling return to some windows, as it still tries to get my attention. But now that I know what that sound is, it always brings me back to that night. I never look. If that storm had lasted for just seconds longer, I may not have ever been able to warn you about that creature that follows the storm, and to tell you just to close your curtains the moment it begins to rain, and don't look outside, or else you'll regret it, just like me.